What is organized crime? Well, essentially, what organized crime is a relationship between the underworld and government officials to allow the underworld to essentially operate.
Organized crime, as it's considered in terms of the literature, is basically a group of criminals that are organize themselves together for types of profit, usually in illicit activities, but even today we now see them in legitimate businesses more than ever before. So the types of ideas and themes that were associated with organized crime during the earlier part of the 20th century are not necessarily the same ones that you see at this particular point in time.
Large scale, obviously organized has to be in there in the sense that there's a structure, there's a deliberate intent to commit crimes of various kinds within this large structure. It's very much like taking the model of a corporation and applying it to criminal activity. So in that case, it applies much more broadly, I think, even than what we mean when we say the mafia.
It's not the mob. That it's not just a bunch of bad guys out there who are interested in murder and mayhem. Indeed, that's not organized crime at all. That's not organization. To realize that this is really an organization. It's organized for the purpose of certain criminal activities, profitable criminal activities. And that's why it's called organized crime.
You know, if you're thinking about the mob, a lot of it is about conflicts of race and ethnicity. You know, and sort of people debating about, you know, who are we, who gets to have power here, who gets to control work, who gets to control the economy. That's where all of that came from, is from a battle over race, ethnicity, and class. All of those things fitting together in a fairly small space. I mean, part of it is also we're talking about a relatively small community with all of that going on.
The impact here of organized crime in many ways is just fulfilling what people wanted to do and then, you know, getting their profits out of it.
I have a colleague who argues that part of how organized crime got started here was that the Italian immigrants who came to this area, at least some of them, and especially those who settled in Niles, were actually better educated and came from a slightly more privileged background than some of the other immigrants. They came in with the idea that it was absolutely appropriate and okay for them to fight in their own defense. And they came in with some organizing skills. And that because of that, they were able to set up organizations that were kind of self-defense organizations, which is really where the mob got started here. Well, if you go back to that, and you understand it not as Italians brought corruption with them, but Italians brought organizing skills with them. And they came into a community where they were seen as outsiders, where they were seen as a threat in many ways, and had to find ways to act on their own behalf. Then you understand that the mindset that develops later is not something that enables the mob, but that the conditions that immigrants faced when they came to this community was something that enabled the mob. And out of that came a mindset that said, the people you can count on most to help you are people you know.
In the 1920s, there was some local criminalities associated with organized crime. Again, they were local groups, but a lot of what they were doing is providing protection for immigrant workers against the various what are called nativists, the people who have been here for many years, who wanted to exclude them from various types of businesses, enterprises, and work. And there was a particular case in Niles, Ohio, where a number of Klan members disappeared as part of a major uprising, and the result was that organized crime is rumored that killed them. But again, they were trying to protect the Irish and the Italians and the Jews who were very much in need of protection because from the nativists.
A lot of it has to do with the size of geographically, the size of the Mahoning Valley. Cleveland, or Youngstown and Warren, I guess, being the biggest incorporated areas. It's a pretty compact area, and there are several elements have combined to create so much political corruption, which of course the mob needs to operate, and the fact that Youngstown is roughly halfway between two major mob families, that being Cleveland and Pittsburgh, it was just, like I said, it was the Mahoning Valley was sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And so what happened in Youngstown, why Youngstown got its reputation, was because of a border war, if you will, in the 1950s between these two groups. And people looked askance at this because of the types of murders that were occurring, but some people didn't care. They felt like they were murdering each other, and that wasn't such a big deal. But certainly that's where Youngstown's got its reputation.
Back in the late 40s and early 50s, the administration of Mayor Henderson, along with his police chief, Fred Allen, they launched an attack on organized crime, which is very significant because at this time, organized crime was fairly well developed nationally. And this was even before the Kefauver investigation had occurred, which is the first congressional investigation of organized crime. And here locally, they actually did try to shut down organized crime.
The first time that most people start to talk about Youngstown on a national scale, pop culture being identified with organized crime, is 1962, when the Saturday Evening Post names Youngstown Crimetown, USA.
Bombs were the weapon of choice for a long time, really in the Mahoning Valley first, before Cleveland. During the 50s and 60s, there was a bombing war that culminated with the murder of an innocent a child who was a son of one of the mob figures, Charlie Caballero.
But for about 1954 until the mid-70s, not too much response. Really, there wasn't too much public reaction. And then you began getting the Citizens League developing with Jim Callan and my former colleague Lowell Sautry and others. They started responding to this, the problems that we had here.
And we were meeting Saturday mornings in secret because people were afraid. You have an uneasiness, certainly, and back then things were different than they are now, and these are people that will kill. We weren't reckless. We thought through everything that we did, but I have to confess that particularly in the first several years, at night walking by open windows with open blinds, the thought passes through your head.
When the steel industry went down, when you lost so many jobs, you didn't have as many people playing the numbers and involved in the rackets, that the types of corruption within public institutions became more apparent, and which became the story of organized crime in the 1980s and 90s in Youngstown.
Yeah, then the Jim Trafficking, you might say, the first Jim Trafficking trial where he's accused of receiving a bribe from organized crime, and I'm sure that stimulated more interest in the Citizens League, but then afterwards, especially when he's found not guilty, well, that sort of, you might say, caused growing disinterest in it. I mean, he's not guilty, so where's the punchline basically just wasn't there.
I testified before the United States Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations that was doing, it's the old Kefauver Committee, and they were investigating organized crime in the Great Lakes region. And when I came back, I suppose it reflects a little bit of naivete. I wasn't expecting a ticker tape parade, but it seemed to me that we had put forth some, not necessarily new information, but we had gathered information and had made a strong statement about what we thought existed in this community and what we thought needed to be done. And a major reason for going down there was to encourage greater federal involvement, as I had mentioned earlier. But when I got back here, the reception was I'd have to say almost universally negative.
I think the reaction in the 90s began really with the assassination of Joy Naples. I can still remember getting a call from the newspapers. I just started the course a year or so before, and they called me and wanted to know what I thought about this assassination. Well, there really hadn't been an assassination of a underworld boss here in a long time. And then slowly but surely, one rather striking event after another begins to happen. You have a bombing at Jim Filomena's home. He was a county prosecutor. You had Gary Van Brocklen, a former county prosecutor's legs broken right in downtown Youngstown. And then it leads up to the Gaines assassination.
Very interesting to me that, and I think that's testimony that the organized crime crew here operated with a lot of autonomy, that you would have a murder attempt on a prosecutor, on a county prosecutor, that goes against the basic rules of La Cosa Nostra.
When I ran for the position, I was approached with an offer of money and informed them that I would not break the law. Of course, I didn't receive any money. Because of that, there was a contract put out on my life. The amount was $35,000, and on December 24th at about 2:03 a.m., an intruder broke into my house, and I was shot and left for dead in my kitchen. Not only innocent, but a soon-to-be law enforcement officer and an elected official. It struck at the very core of our system of government.
He was the newly elected county prosecutor. He's the first public official that the underworld actually tried to assassinate. They never tried to do that again. They essentially had a prohibition against assassinating public officials. But in this instance, Paul Game became a marked man, and that is what is going to really put this community in the, as I say in the history books, it's going to be a seminal event in the history of organized crime.
So Youngstown really stood out in that regard. That was a very significant event and actually was if there was a catalyst to the investigation that led to all of these convictions, it was the attempted assassination and the ultimate breaking of that attempted murder that led to many of the convictions here.
I have to say, on some level, that was the point when I really started to believe it. I had heard this as, yeah, this is what happens in Youngstown. It's all throughout Youngstown politics. It's all throughout Youngstown culture. And for a long time, I think I sort of assumed, right, that's what they say, but it's not really out there. And as that string of both Strollo's testimony and the FBI indictments that came out of that, close to 90 public officials, not all public officials, 90 public individuals being indicted on one thing or another, that it really became clear to me that this was very much still in action. It wasn't one isolated case of my congressional representative. It was, in fact, organized in all the ways that organized crime is supposed to be.
In this area, in the late 80s, Joey Naples and Lenny Strollo were both made members of they were inducted into the Pittsburgh organized crime family. Now, I don't know if some of the others were made members or not. There was a Democratic Party chairman at one time in Mahoning County that was a reputed made member.
I don't think Jim Callan is a bad person. I just think that Jim Callan makes statements that are absurd, and that I really don't think that Jim Callan has a whole lot of walking around sense. I can't say that there is such a thing as organized crime in this community. Okay, there were some guys who emerged. Of course, Joey Naples had the reputation of being a mobster and a member of the Pittsburgh crime family. I think the Carabias had the reputation of being associated with the Cleveland crime family. Organized crime? I'm worried about disorganized crime. I'm worried about the guy who's going to, say, break into your garage and maybe you discover him and he shoots you. Or some guy who's high on crack, probably like this kid that shot that policeman, okay? He wasn't a member of organized crime. He was disorganized. So, again, I've said this 25 years ago. Don't worry about organized crime. Worry about disorganized crime.
Kind of a dichotomy, you know, between the statistics we know exists there. Throughout the 1990s, this was one of the most violent places in Ohio. I think our murder rate was higher than any other place in the state. Yet I never heard anybody saying they felt terribly frightened or afraid to go out or anything else like this. I'm sure there were sections of Youngstown where that may have been true, but I never saw it on a wide basis whatsoever. It seemed exactly to be that people felt very safe here.
The hope that I've always had, and I think there's some evidence of it, is that each generation will be removed from it a little bit more, from the direct effects and some of the benefits that it provided. The mafia exists here and in other places in the world because it provided benefits, provided service, whether it was helping unions enforce strikes or helping businessmen get rid of a competitor, or providing services for the so-called leaders of the community to go gamble or do something else in Prohibition, go get liquor that they wanted. So that it did serve a purpose.
We did interviews with people who's couldn't get bank loans, and so they got money from the mobsters, and in essence they were an alternative way of purchasing a house. The only reason they couldn't get the loans from the bank is they were Italian, or they were Irish, or they were some other sort of ethnic group. And so the result is that, yeah, the idea that they engaged in certain types of protections, they provided certain types of services, especially also during Prohibition, obviously, to provide alcohol, and they were also involved in crimes that people for a long time have contended are not, there are no victims. I think that's wrong, but the idea of victimless crime in terms of some of the types of rackets, which has been very prominent in this particular area.
I had an individual probably about a week and a half ago actually tell me that things were safer when the mafia was in control here, because the mafia controlled these street gangs and these and he was primarily referring to minorities, and I was just, and I hadn't heard that for several years, and I was kind of surprised that I heard it just about a week and a half ago.
If the mafia was running America, we wouldn't be in debt.
Well, I tell you.
You know that? They know how to make money, and they would never. The United States would be rich if they ran the country, and there wouldn't be all these murders around here. I guarantee all these guys, there's robberies and things like that. If the mafia, that's been an old saying ever since, man, if the mafia was running America, we wouldn't have no problems, because ain't nobody going to fool around with them guys.
There's so many stories, man. There's so many things that people don't. I mean, I know a little bit, and there's a lot of people that, you know.
I enjoy working for Joey. I worked for him for almost 9 years. As I said before, he never asked me to do anything illegal. He's a good person. In my eyes, he treated me and my family, he took care of me and my family. If anything went wrong at my house or on the job, it was taken care of.
Everywhere I went, someone asked me when they found out from Youngstown, is it true about the mafia, you know, about the mob and everything? They called it Little Chicago and stuff. Well, I actually got involved in some fracases over it because guys, you know, were accusing me of being a mobster because I'm Italian and, you know, being from Youngstown.
It's funny because a lot of people think, well, maybe he was a gangster. Maybe he was a mobster. In my opinion, he wasn't. He took care of what he had to take care of.
I personally knew some mafia, but they didn't bother me and I didn't bother them. As far as I'm concerned, they were as nice as the next guy.
I grew up on the east side of Youngstown back in the 60s and 70s. And I've seen a lot, learned a lot, watched a lot. And was there corruption? Yes, there was corruption, but it was everyday life. It was something you did every day. You watched it on a bar stool or in a convenience store, and you saw it happen to the point where you didn't think it was no big deal.
They were all good guys. They liked to gamble and stuff like that, but they were all good guys.
They didn't hurt nobody but themselves.
Right, that's right.
Silk suits. My daughter would go in there, mud all over, and jump right on top of him. And never bat an eyelash. Take her in the candy room, anything she wanted, she could have. He was that much of a generous person.
Why did they blow De Niro
One from
up?
Cleveland, one from...
They blew De Niro up. There was one of the nicest racketeers, whatever you want to call them. Right? There's nobody disliked this guy except the guys that were jealous of him or something. He helped everybody. You know, see, if you were in trouble and you needed $1,000, this guy would give it to you. You didn't have to pay it back. That's the kind of guy he was. And they blew him up. He got in his car, started it, but bing, he was gone.
Have I seen people make transactions with a phone call? One phone call changed the whole course of Youngstown? Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it happen. But have I think it diminished? To some degree, I've seen it diminish.
After he got mad about that,
I think it's a lot better than it was as far as law abiding. But when you're used to that as a little kid and it's common denominator of what you do for a living, it doesn't even faze you. It doesn't even bother you.
In my opinion, I thought maybe he was one of the bombers because he blew himself up. Don't you remember Billy Naples was setting a bomb in a car? Well, he was the only one there and he got blown up.
Let's put it this way. In my opinion, the FBI and the DEA know who the hell killed Joey Naples. There's no doubt in my mind that they know. But they cut a deal with somebody to squeal on somebody else, so he's sitting in seventh heaven. You know, which sucks. Murder's murder. Don't shit can the file. Take it and just throw it in the garbage can. He was a human being too.
I still think it's there. I still think there's some, you know, it's just like nepotism. It doesn't change. It doesn't go anywhere. So we'll see what happens with you.
Who do you think is the most person that writes up about a lot about Youngstown and makes it look bad just so they can sell newspapers, and who is it?
In town?
Yeah. Who's your only paper?
Well, the Vindicator? No,
Yes.
but there's
That's
that.
it. He said it.
The Vindicator.
It's like our local situation here. I think that the one institution that has done more damage to the city of Youngstown than any other institution is the Youngstown Vindicator. In their zeal to sell newspapers, they came up with the proposition, Crime Town USA, Murder Town USA. Well, of course, that made great print, okay, so that they could sell newspapers. And you got to remember that their advertising rates are based on their subscription rates. But the thing that makes me feel good about the demise of Youngstown is they shot themselves in the foot, okay? Their circulation has dropped way down because the population of Youngstown has dropped way down. And I can't think of a group of more deserving bastards than the Youngstown Vindicator, because they did it to all of us, but they did it to themselves too.
And I don't remember exactly who said it or the exact words, but one of the stations said, well, it just costs too much money to cover. And another one said, well, we don't have investigative reporters. and it might have been the newspaper, but I can't swear to that, whoever was there representing them said, well, you know, this could be dangerous. And my experience over the years has been that if something occurs, generally they'll cover it. And I know this was a quote from the newspaper. They said, and this was the Vindicator, we're not here to investigate, we're chroniclers of what happens.
The media wants to sell news. It's a bad day for the media when it's a slow news day. So they probably find it entertaining. I mean, if you'll recall, all of the hullabaloo over the local mafia trials that we had, both in Cleveland and down here in the courthouse in Mahoning County.
You do have those who try to take advantage of the situation, who try to editorialize, who try to, exploit what has gone on here, and focus and use terms that this is Mob Town, USA, or it's the murder capital of America, or it's a mafia capital, largely because this helps to, as they used to say, sell papers.
So I can't say across the board there hasn't been activity, but I think it's been a problem in this community in terms of trying to address the problem, and that the lack of an aggressive media, an aggressive investigatory media, has helped contribute to the ability of the mafia to continue. And it's no secret, I was criticized more than once in the print media for exaggerating the mafia problem.
I think it's human nature when there's so much coverage in the media. Again, there seems to be a perception that it's deeper and everybody's involved. And unfortunately, that becomes for some people that becomes the image that that they associate with the area.
Well, one thing that disturbed me about the New Republic article was that they didn't differentiate between the city of Youngstown and Mahoning County, as well as perhaps Trumbull County or others. They're just sort of using Youngstown as kind of a term to cover the whole area. And yet, when we have the crime probes, very few in the city government of Youngstown were prosecuted. It was largely the county, and then also some of the working class suburbs over in Camel and Struthers that largely were the ones who were prosecuted.
I'm going to say this right now. It's said that it's organized crime in Youngstown. Nobody in my neighborhood, and I live on the north side of Youngstown, was convicted of criminal activity in the last 15 years. So where are they? Where are these people? Well, they're in Boardman. They're in Poland. They're in Canfield. They're in Austintown. But nobody says there's an organized crime problem in Canfield or Poland or Boardman. And when I confronted folks with that, people became very angry because they wanted to pin all the problems on the area on Youngstown and on the Youngstown community, and which they are part of and apart from. And why are they apart from it? Largely along ideas of race and class. But the response to that it was very visceral on their part. How could I possibly say that if Lenny Strollo lived in Canfield? Maybe Canfield's got a crime problem.
The most crime-free area in the state of Ohio is downtown Youngstown, okay? Usually Christmas Eve used to be a real busy night because last-minute shoppers. This coming Christmas, come to downtown Youngstown. You can take a goddamn bowling ball and run it down Federal Street and not hit anything.
I have been working downtown since I was 21 years old. And I have never had a problem downtown in all those years. And I am now 52. So what, I've been down here 31 years, either as a policeman or a lawyer or a prosecutor. But I suppose what will destroy the perception will be when there's some development down here and when we actually have people coming here, such as Ed Powers, so this is a beginning, and restaurants down here where people can socialize, and they'll realize then, experience of course, will be that their cars aren't getting broken into, they're not getting their purses snatched, they're not getting robbed, and they're not getting shot. That, I think, is what really the effect of the Filomeni years when he was here and these cases were being fixed and his violence was just completely out of control. That's the effect that we have from this. And it's just taken longer than I thought it would to basically reduce the violence to the point where it is now, where it was before he actually announced that he was going to plea bargain these drug-related homicides.
I think there are many people in positions of authority in this community that, if not owing their positions to the mafia, don't have a clue to really what the mafia is or what it does sociologically or economically to the community. So it becomes easy to do that. And it's easy because they know that there'll be people around them supporting them, because in general there's been that attitude because it's been so integral to the community.
I had accepted the job at Youngstown State. I knew I was moving to Youngstown. I knew almost nothing about Youngstown at the time that I accepted that job. And about 2 weeks later, I turned on the Phil Donahue show and met Jim Trafficant. And looked at that and thought, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? I mean, this guy just seemed crazy to me. He seemed like a joke. And I thought, that's the place I'm going to? This is what represents them.
Jim Trafficking, a bright fellow, but has an ego so large that had he thrown the touchdown pass that won the Super Bowl, he'd be pissed off that he had to share the limelight with the wide receiver.
Unique figure, and the thing that comes to mind is how he gets so much support, how he gets and has had so much support over the years. But you know, I think back to some of the arguments that he's made, and it's funny how some people can take political corruption in one context and use it to their favor and create an argument for it and justify perhaps something that they've been involved in.
It took me to the point of doing real research on Youngstown and really thinking and talking with colleagues and friends and people in the community about what they saw in him to understand it. For a long time, it was just a puzzle. And part of why I got started doing research on Youngstown was that I didn't get it. This was a place where people thought absolutely in ways different from all the places I had lived before.
I saw Jim Trafficant as the poor people's populist. When Trafficant came to power, just as the steel mills collapsed. And he became popular because as county sheriff, he refused to sign eviction notices for people who couldn't pay their rents or couldn't pay their mortgages. And he went to court and spontaneously says, this community is experiencing enough pain already without throwing people out in the streets. That, in many ways, are immortal words. And Trafficant's foundation for his popularity stems from his refusal to sign those eviction notices. I think this was real Jim Trafficant, a guy who wasn't going to throw people out in the streets when the place seemed to be collapsing. And from that, he gains this tremendous popularity. If you look at voting patterns for Trafficant, it's the poor, it's the working class who supported him time and time again. And those were the people who were being thrown out of their homes, and he refused to do it. And essentially they became, to him, they became a friend for life.
You know, there's a girl that writes into the paper, and she wrote all about trafficking. I'm talking about trafficking that went to jail.
Yeah.
And this woman was writing all these articles about him and how bad he is and this and that. I think she wrote a lot of bad articles about the guy. Look what this kid has done for Youngstown. Now, I know he overstepped his bounds.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
But they all do. And I thought maybe he got a raw deal.
We did lose a good politician. He's doing time in the penitentiary now. I guess you probably know him, the congressman. So he did a lot for the valley, but I don't know. Too many people were against him. Then after a while, you know.
And by the way, a guy who should not be in the penitentiary, he's there because he upset the good old boy fraternity by telling the truth about it, when he said he never associated with more prostitutes in his life than he did in the halls of Congress.
Win with a G in front of him. And that's what we intend to do.
Every congressman voted to expel him because of the trial, because he was found convicted, in spite of the fact that 3 of the jurors since have sort of tried to recant these jurors feel that they have were cheated during the trial, in that they didn't hear all of the government's testimony. Okay. And the reason I say that is because I was one of the jurors on the trafficking case, and I changed my mind after rendering the verdict, because of all of these things that happened after the verdict. You find out all of these things that weren't brought up at the trial. The way that the trial came down, there was no other verdict possible for the jury than to convict on all counts.
The people loved him. They gravitated to him. There was never one time that he never hesitated to stop and talk to a person on the street, no matter what socioeconomic level that person was on. You know, low, middle, high income, he could come down to anybody's level and deal with the situation, and I learned that from him. And nobody was ever turned away in the congressional office. We handled every single problem under the sun, every problem, and we helped every person. Were we successful 100% of the time? No. But I tell you what, 99.9% of the time, we gave it every effort to help everybody. And we had a great staff and a great office. Yeah, and the project show.
He kept getting reelected by his home constituents by a huge margin. So they couldn't get rid of him that way. So the way to get rid of him is to bring up some trumped up charges. Again, by his own admission, he's not a choir boy, but these were blown up charges, which as a jury, because the trial was in Cleveland, not in his home district where nobody knew him on the jury, no peers, and so there was no other verdict possible.
Yeah, go down and make a left.
You got the camera?
Well, I think it's turning. You know, I definitely think it's turning. But in the past, it's been terrible, and for good reason. But I think the media does hype it more because we have this reputation, and there are other cities who have just as much corruption as we had, but they don't get the attention because now Youngstown has become synonymous for this kind of corruption. But I think it happens in a lot of other places around the country. Not all places. It's clearly not normal business, but there are other places. But people have become fixated on this area for a lot of good reasons.
Dennis, you got a second to hold the baby?
Sure. Thank you. I think that over time that we as a community have risen up against that and started to chip away at it. But I think that there's there's still a higher comfort level with corruption in this area than there ought to be. So I think that it's sort of like 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. But I think that ultimately we're making our climb out of that kind of a situation.
What's the name? Matea.
Mr. Dad. Morris.
You have to look this way.
Yeah.
Ready? Good one.
Mr. Cosenz.
It just seems that this is a stigma. And every time there's a political race or any type of, it's just not my race. I mean, you can look at the prosecutor's race and see what's going on there.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot at stake here for these individuals, and these seats obviously are very important for this certain power structure, this political machine, to keep its power base. And when somebody threatens that power base, they will stoop to whatever level to retain it. It's about power, and that's wrong. It should be about people.
You elect people who are not tied to interest groups. I mean, it's always been the case. You know, what's political corruption about? Essentially, it's about money. It's about people who need money to get elected to office, or when they're in office, they take money for whatever reason. It's not just something that happens in Youngstown. It's just that Youngstown's a little bit more upfront about it. In other places, it goes on and nothing's said. In other places, it goes on and it ends up being some kind of a quiet corporate deal. Youngstown's politics have always been bare knuckle and out in the open and very raw. The fact of the matter is, Youngstown's probably a lot more honest than a lot of other places around town. It's just it's more upfront.
Plus, I don't mind telling you, I think Bush is the biggest liar that ever adorned the Oval Office. And he's got half the media on his side, or not half, because let's face it, the people who own and run the media, okay, are all the people with the big bucks. You talk about organized crime. That's organized crime. But it's easy to keep the multitudes anesthetized, okay, if we point at some drug dealer. That way they are not looking in the direction of the guy who's robbing Enron.
I think the discussion of organized crime survives and continues for another purpose, and that is to mask other types of issues that the community doesn't want to talk about. For example, it masks the issues of race and class. This statistical metropolitan area is the fourth most segregated in the United States. It's a lot easier to talk about the myths of organized crime, or organized crime itself is holding the area back, than talking about the issues of race and racism in this community. It's a lot easier to talk about that as opposed to the types of poverty and class issues that have come up as a result of the deindustrialization problems that have started in the 1970s. So we think it masks a whole lot of discussions that the community should be having because of because outsiders want to define what this community is as opposed to the community itself.
They're generally very wise. They like to run with the current rather than against the current. And right at the moment, they're not terribly popular. It'd be difficult to make any inroads. But in time, I'm sure they realize that other public issues will replace the concern about organized crime, and then it's a much more receptive environment for them to return to the area.
So they will fill a void if they're able to. It's like water going through the path of least resistance. It'll go where it's able to.
As long as there's a desire for people to gamble illegally, you're really going to have organized crime operating here.
I can honestly tell you, if I wanted to place a bet in Youngstown today, I wouldn't know where to go. And I don't mind telling you, over the years, I used to go to Vegas probably half a dozen times a year. I helped pay for the MGM and the Tropicana. But I believe that, again, it's a form of recreation, okay? Why is it lawful for the state of Ohio to run a numbers racket? And actually, even the state of Ohio is a thief. I think they only pay something like 6 to 1 or 600 to 1. The racketeers used to pay 800 to 1, okay? So the state of Ohio is taking a bigger rake up than the racketeers did. Now, if gambling is supposed to have a mal-effect on the family structure, are we talking about only gambling that is done by the so-called racketeering element, or does that include the people who run the lottery in the state of Ohio?
I've seen some national media representations that want very much to say Organized crime is gone. It's all done in Youngstown. You know, they caught those 90 people, and Lenny Strollo rolled, and it's all over. Everything's fine now. I certainly don't believe that. I think things are better. But I see the people who are running for office now, and I know enough about who they were connected with in previous rounds of government. I certainly don't believe that it's gone, but I don't know that there's much of anybody who can pin down exactly where things stand. Certainly not somebody who's outside of it, as we all are.
We very much had been living in a lawless society here, in a lawless community, where some of our very government institutions were operating as criminal enterprises. The biggest price that we've paid, and I've talked about the various things that cost money, the biggest price we're paying in this community is the loss of our children. And they're leaving because of the quality of life and the lack of economic opportunity. And that is not due entirely to the corruption problem, but the corruption problem is a major obstacle to correcting that.
What exactly is Youngstown, the Mahoning Valley? And to understand this area, I think first and foremost we have to realize this was the classic industrial city in the United States. There is no other area in the country, no other city like Youngstown. No other city in the country that was essentially solely a one industry city. It's unique. And that uniqueness is responsible for what has happened since the steel industry collapsed, because suddenly they lost their identity. And what seems to have, to a certain extent, replaced that steel identity is the mafia. It was here, you know, you had these bombings and stuff like this. Others have said it kind of gave the place a certain sense of identity before that time. But with the collapse of the steel industry, the only continuing identity was, this is, you know, the home of the mafia or something. We're the mafia and stuff like this. And I think it was an attempt to try to maintain some degree of identity other than, in quote, a failed steel town that led to this identity with the mafia.
Part of what this community needs is to have a better understanding of its own experience with organized crime. Not one that says, why do these crazy people like this stuff? Not one that says, it once was here and now it's all gone. Not one that says, well, you know, there are Italians there and Italians are like that. But one that really looks at what happened here in terms of conflicts between different groups of people. What happened here in terms of conflicts between capitalism and the lives of ordinary working people? Where, you know, part of what we argue in the book is that one of the reasons that the mob became more revered in Youngstown than it had been before, I think, in the 1980s, is that all of the other institutions had failed. Now, I do a lot of work with unions. It's all about being organized. That aspect of organized crime is something we could actually learn a lot from. Ideas about loyalty, ideas about commitment to community and commitment to others. There are good things there, and if we could hold on to those pieces and turn that same kind of energy into developing this community, we might be in much better shape.
The town had a great sense of itself, and it had the economics to build itself. But what happens when a community loses that? When all those sort of local industries get taken over by other outsiders who then just run the mills and businesses into the ground? And then what happens to the community? It loses its sense of direction of who it is, and it lets other people define what it is. Youngstown's a very proud community. You know, and this community, more than any other community in the United States and probably internationally, when the mills closed, fought to save the mills. Okay, this town is about struggle, economic struggle, racial struggle, religious struggle at times, mob conflict at times. People fought to make their way in this community, and the community should be proud of what happened here. That's not to minimize the damage done by criminal elements at certain times, But when the community lets other people define what it is, it's in very serious trouble.
I've seen, I've seen it firsthand. I just thought it was a way of life, I guess, Bobby. You know what I'm saying? It was a way of life. It's the way you did things. It's the way things were happening, you know? And if you had any brains or any ambition, you didn't get involved in it. Somebody asked you to do them a favor, you did them a favor, you damn sure didn't ask for no payment. You just kept on going. But they were just the guys, man. You just did that. I was a little kid, 50 years old. With a little kid, I just did that. So it's kind of, a way of life around here. But so I don't think it's fair to the people of Youngstown that are Italian, or to the people of Youngstown themselves to say, it's a black hole, it's Mob Town, USA, it's Murder Town, USA. This is my home. I love my home. This is where I'm from. And I'm very proud to say that I'm from Youngstown, Ohio.